It is midwinter in the year 1160. On one of the coldest nights of the year, a young woman is fleeing across a frozen landscape to the east of the Japanese capital of Heiankyo. She has 2 infant children accompanying her, and in her arms she holds a baby, just a few months old. Her name is Tokiwa, and she is fleeing for her life. Until recently, she had been serving as a maid for the former empress Kujo-in, but yesterday she received the news she had been dreading. Lord Minamoto no Yoshitomo, the father of her 3 children and the head of the Genji samurai clan, has been murdered. Just a few weeks earlier, Yoshitomo had attempted a daring coup against the imperial court, but had been outwitted by his great rival Lord Kiyomori of the Heike. After a fierce battle between the 2 samurai clans, the Genji had been defeated. Yoshitomo escaped to the east, but was betrayed and murdered by one of his own retainers. And now Lord Kiyomori has sent out scouts to track down and eliminate any survivors of the Genji clan. Desperate to escape her pursuers, Tokiwa seeks refuge at the great temple of Kiyomizu in the eastern foothills of the capital. There she spends the night praying at the statue of the Bodhisattva Kannon, her 2 older boys sheltering under her skirts, and her youngest clasped inside the fold of her robe. She prays in silence and implores the goddess of mercy to save her sons. I can manage having to mourn Yoshitomo, she thinks, but not for an instant could I survive losing my boys. The temple priests urge her to take some rice, but she is too sick at heart to look at it, and instead just passes it for her children. It is desperately cold, so the priests urge her, please stay here, at least until the snow stops. That is kind, but I cannot, she says. The temple is too close to Rokuhara. They will find me. At the hour of the hare, 6 a.m., she walks out again into the blizzard. At first, her 2 elder children manage to walk with her, but their feet begin to ache and bleed. The eldest, 7-year-old Imawaka, sits down in the snow and begins to cry, saying, I'm so cold, I don't know what to do. How can you not understand, Imawaka, she says, terrified that his cries will be heard. The enemy is nearby, and people will hear if you cry. You are Yoshitomo's sons, and you will be taken and beheaded. Why will you not listen to me? Imawaka's cries subside, but then her second child, the 5-year-old Otowaka, collapses and begins crying, Cold, I'm so cold. Tokiwa cannot carry him, as she has her baby in her arms. Instead, she holds his hand and urges him on with his brother, not knowing where they might be heading. At last, as the morning light seeps over the eastern hills, she sees the village of Fushimi, where a light is shining from a house on the hillside. As they approach the house, she places her hand on her baby's heart to check he is still alive. Ushiwaka, she whispers. Ushiwaka, we are safe. Although it was his elder brother Yoritomo who would become the first shogun and who would found a dynasty and become not only the most powerful person in his family but also the whole of Japan, it is Yoritomo's younger brother Yoshitsune who today still captures the imagination of Japanese people. It is Yoshitsune, originally named Ushiwaka, who has statues and memorials across Japan and whose story has been repeated in films and TV, manga and video games. In a poll conducted by the broadcaster NHK in 2006, asking people in Japan to name their favourite person in world history, Yoshitsune was the only Japanese figure from medieval times who made the top 20, where he was ranked directly between Beethoven and Leonardo da Vinci. So how did Yoritomo's brother, Yoshitsune, become such a legend? Well, certainly his life was dramatic, and there were moments during the Genpei War when his courage and brilliance really does turn the course of Japanese history. But it is also perhaps because his life, as we shall see, was ultimately quite tragic. There are also parts of Yoshitsune's life, particularly his younger years, that we really don't know much about. There is a famous line from a John Ford film saying, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. And that's what writers and storytellers over the years have been doing with Yoshitsune. Over many generations, the gaps in his life have been filled in with extraordinary stories to the point where it's difficult to know what is true about him and what isn't. So what do we know about the young Yoshitsune? Well, we know that as an infant he was known as Ushiwaka, or Young Bull, and had 2 elder brothers, and that these 3 boys were the sons of Minamoto no Yoshitomo, the Genji leader. Late in life, Yoshitomo had fallen in love with a court lady named Tokiwa, a lady-in-waiting for the former Empress Kujoin. The Dowager Empress was the widow of the young Emperor Konoe, whose early death had triggered a series of events that ultimately led to the defeat of the Genji and the death of the clan's leader, Yoshitomo. Now, with their father murdered, all 3 of Tokiwa's sons were extremely fortunate to survive, and it was only because of a heavy price that their mother paid that they were able to live at all. So let us go back to that cold January night in 1160. After her desperate flight in the snowstorm, Tokiwa arrived in Fushimi. Today, Fushimi is one of the most recognized places in Japan. The Fushimi Inari Shrine's path of red torii gates is one of the most photographed spots in Kyoto. But during the late Heian period, Fushimi was still a remote hillside that was thought to be haunted. Nevertheless, for Tokiwa and her sons, Fushimi proved to be a safe haven. An elderly woman gave her shelter for the night, and despite suspecting that her guest was no ordinary traveller, she did not ask any questions. But the next day, Tokiwa feared that she was still too close to the Heike forces at Rokuhara, so she decided to move on, eventually making her way to a relative's place at a town called Uda. It was there that she received alarming reports that her mother had been taken captive in the capital and, according to some reports, was being tortured in the Heike stronghold of Rokuhara. Lord Kiyomori was desperate to locate all of Yoshitomo's children so that any remaining threat from the Genji family could be eradicated. So again and again Tokiwa's mother was asked by her interrogators where her daughter was, even though she did not know. So now Tokiwa faces a terrible choice. Should she continue to flee eastward for the sake of her children, or should she return to the capital with the hope of saving her mother and begging for mercy for her children? She decides to take a chance and return to the capital. When she arrives in Heiankyo, she is passed into the custody of the Heike samurai Ito Kagetsuna, who played a vital role in the conflicts in the last few years. During the Hogen Rebellion, he had been the first Heike samurai to face the giant Genji warrior Tamatomo, and 4 years later he oversaw the daring escape from captivity of the Emperor Nijo. Now his responsibility is to take care of a precious and by now very famous captive. Tokiwa implores Kagetsuna to intercede for her. "Convince Lord Kiyomori," she says. "Please let my mother go." Moved by her pleas, Kagetsuna gives his word that he will pass on her message, and soon enough, Tokiwa is reunited with her mother. Her mother, though, is furious. "Tokiwa, what terrible thing have you done? I am old and my next life approaches. Even if I survive this, how much longer do you think I have? But what about your children? It is a delight to see you again, my child, of course, but at what cost have you brought them here?" Hand in hand, cheek to cheek, in anguish they console each other in their prison cell. Presently, Tokiwa is summoned to Rokuhara. She puts her faith in the goddess of mercy, and realizing it is futile to hide her children, she walks directly into the lion's den, her 2 older boys on either side of her, and the youngest, Ushiwaka, in her arms. By now, word has quickly spread through the city, and a crowd has gathered to witness the moment the most beautiful woman in the capital meets the most powerful warlord in the land. Brought into the reception hall, Tokiwa falls weeping to her knees before Kiyomori and says, "Yoshitomo committed a great crime against you, my lord, and now that his children face execution, it would be wrong for me to beg for the life of a single one. Instead, I ask that you take my life, and please show mercy for my children. That is why I come to you, shaming Yoshitomo's memory and heedless of my own distressing appearance." There is a pause as Kiyomori examines his captive. "Bravely said," he announces, and looks to his aides, some of whom he sees are shedding tears. "Yes, I have heard enough. You may go," says Kiyomori. Tokiwa and her children are escorted from the chamber and taken back to Kagetsune's quarters. After she leaves, Kiyomori's eldest son, Shigemori, leans over to whisper in his ear, "Father, there is no telling what trouble these 3 boys may cause if they grow up. You are doing your family no good if you—" "I understand," Kiyomori says to his son. But with Lady Heike insisting on sparing Yoritomo, who is already a young adult, it makes no sense for me to execute these boys. And besides, their mother is very beautiful. Exactly what happened next between Tokiwa and Kiyomori is not known for sure, but what we do know is that both she and her children were spared. Tokiwa was assigned quarters by Kiyomori, who became a frequent visitor, and in time Tokiwa gave birth to a daughter, believed to be the child of Lord Kiyomori. Her eldest 2 sons were sent off to monasteries where they became monks. The youngest, Ushiwaka, when he reached the age of 7, was also sent for religious training to the temple of Kurama in the north of the capital. It was assumed that he too would follow his brother's paths and in time would become a monk. But it turned out that the life of Yoshitomo's youngest son would follow a very different path. In the Heian era, Kurama Temple was an extremely inaccessible place, which is why it was chosen as the boys' place of exile, a remote location to the north of the capital where the son of Yoshitomo would lead a Spartan life of solitude and harsh religious training. For the first few years, the young Yoshitsune, who by now was known as Shanao, was by all accounts an exemplary student, diligent, intelligent, and stronger and faster than any of the other disciples. But at this point, the historical narrative of Yoshitsune's life starts to get mixed with legend, and the most famous legend of his time at Kurama relates to the training he received from a mysterious figure known as Sojobo, the great Goblin King. One day, at the height of spring, a party of monks from Kurama Temple, accompanied by some young disciples, decided to make a visit to the hillside to enjoy the cherry blossoms. As the party arrived at the most beautiful viewing site, they encountered an elderly traveller in tattered clothes who declared that he was a visiting mountain priest from the nearby valley of Sojogatani. The priests reluctantly accepted the visitor's presence, but soon became uncomfortable with this strange old man, and they decided to return to the temple. Only one of their group remained, a young disciple named Shanao. It is outrageous," said the old man. "Everyone has left the party just because I am here. They preach compassion for all living creatures, yet they cannot abide a poor guest who joins them to enjoy the cherry blossoms." The boy tried to comfort the man. "Truly, even just for a short moment, we should have closer ties under the cherry blossom. Please, come closer and enjoy the flowers." "Ah, my boy, I felt like I was a flower trapped under a deep mountain, never to be noticed, but how grateful I am that you spoke to me. Tell me, why did you stay by yourself, even though all the other disciples left?" "The other students here are from the Heike clan," the boy said sadly. "They are relatives of the great Lord Kiyomori and are much valued at the temple, and have great reputation in the city. I live in the same temple, but I am ashamed of my situation. I am an abandoned child of no great family. I am not worthy to join them." "My child, how pitiful! You do not know. You are not an abandoned child. You are the child of Minamoto no Yoshitomo and the Lady Tokiwa. Your name, Shanao, is taken after the main deity of this Mount Kurama. You are destined for great things." The boy stared in wonder at this old man who seemed to know so much. "My child," the man said, "there is still light, and the cherry blossoms are illuminated in the evening shadow. Would you like to see them? We still have time before darkness comes. Come, follow me." The old man reached out his hand, and in an instant the boy felt himself flying high over the greatest vistas of cherry blossom. The flowers of Mount Atago, the peak of Mount Takao, the late blossoms of Mount Hira and Mount Yokawa, and finally the greatest of them all, the beautiful views of cherry blossom on the slopes of Mount Yoshino. After returning to Mount Kurama, the boy asked, "Who are you? Please, tell me your name." "There is nothing to hide from you now." I am the great Tengu of Mount Kurama, Sojobo, and I have lived in this mountain for hundreds of years." As he spoke, the old man changed into the body of a wrinkled goblin with a huge red nose, but still he retained the same friendly expression. "My boy, I will hand to you the secret of the art of war. You are destined to be a great leader of the Genji, and if you are to achieve victory over the Heike, you will need to be a powerful warrior." "Please, teach me," the boy said. "If you wish, I will see you again. Tomorrow." The mountain priest leapt into the clouds and an instant flew away, promising to return. According to the legend, the great Tengu Sojobo met with Yoshitsune the next day and began a series of training that would push the boy to his limits, mentally and physically. Every evening, after his temple duties were complete, the boy would meet with the goblins of Sojogatani Valley, where he developed the skills and intelligence that would play a vital role later in his life. In reality, it's more likely that the young Yoshitsune learned about his illustrious family background, not from a goblin, but from a visitor to the temple named Kamada Masachika, the son of Yoshitomo's deputy. But it is the encounter with the Goblin King Sojobo that has inspired countless retellings over the years, most famously as a No theatre play called Kurama Tengu. And if you are fortunate to visit Kurama Temple today, you can experience the legend yourself. The temple is easily accessible from Kyoto now by a cable car, and as you disembark, one of the first things you'll see is a statue of a giant-nosed red goblin, Sojobo, guarding the entrance to the temple. An exiled child who discovers he is the heir to a great family destiny and learns the art of swordsmanship from a strange goblin-like creature, and eventually uses that force to take on a powerful imperial army that has destroyed his family. It is hard not to see the parallels between the tale of Yoshitsune and of the young Luke Skywalker in the Star Wars films. In this analogy, the Dark Lord of the Sith is Lord Kiyomori of the Heike, and the Emperor is, well, the Emperor. Now, it's well known that George Lucas's original Star Wars story was influenced in part by Akira Kurosawa's film The Hidden Fortress. So could Luke Skywalker's training also have had a Japanese influence? Well, perhaps that's pushing it too far, but it's not hard to imagine the little Goblin King Sojobo talking to Yoshitsune in the voice of Yoda. A great warrior you will become." Perhaps a comparison that is easier to make is between Yoshitsune and England's most famous folk hero, Robin Hood. And that's largely because of a celebrated, legendary duel between Yoshitsune and the giant warrior monk Benkei, which is very similar to the encounter on a bridge in Sherwood Forest between Robin Hood and Little John. In both cases, the defeated giant becomes the hero's most loyal companion. In the Japanese version, the encounter begins one night on a bridge in the capital called Gojo. On that night, the streets of the capital are largely empty, as most people are afraid to go out. For there are rumors that a mad monk, a giant of a man named Benkei, is roaming the capital after dark, threatening people and relieving them of their swords. Intrigued, Yoshitsune decides to investigate. As he approaches Gojo Bridge while playing his flute, Yoshitsune notices a menacing-looking monk walking towards him from the other side of the river. The tall monk holds a long staff and a long-handled sword. That must be the sword thief, thinks Yoshitsune. "Hey you, flute player," the monk calls out. "I can't let you pass unless you hand me your sword." "Ah, I've heard that some ass has been around here lately stealing swords," says Yoshitsune. "I'm afraid I can't give you mine as easily as that. You'll have to come and claim it." "That's all right with me. I've collected 999 swords so far in my travels. Yours can be my 1,000th. Benkei suddenly lunges at Yoshitsune with his long-handled sword, preparing to deliver a tremendous blow. Yoshitsune immediately runs towards him, then sways out of reach of the sword just in time, darting under Benkei's left arm like a streak of lightning. Benkei turns and slashes again, but Yoshitsune jumps lightly to his right. Benkei grips his sword again and swipes at Yoshitsune's feet, but the young man jumps out of the way. When Benkei slashes in the air, Yoshitsune ducks, his head inches from the ground. Benkei can't believe it. This man is impossible to touch, he thinks. He lunges again and puts such a thrust into his sword that the tip becomes embedded in the side of the bridge. As he tries to release it, Yoshitsune kicks the giant in the chest, and the weapon flies from Benkei's grasp. Yoshitsune snatches it up and jumps 9 feet into the air, landing on a railing of the bridge. "I've been hearing of all the trouble you've been causing," Yoshitsune causes down to Benkei. "I ought to keep your sword for myself, but I wouldn't want you to think that I need it. Here, take it." With his foot, he bends Benkei's sword out of shape and throws it down. Benkei is stunned, but he is resolved not to leave matters there. You're a better fighter than you look," he says. "I may not have done so well tonight, but next time I will not be so careless." Benkei walks back across the bridge. Yoshitsune suspects it is not the last time they will meet. Sure enough, the following day, Yoshitsune is visiting Kiyomizu Temple in the mountains to the east of the capital. In the late afternoon, he notices the giant monk loitering near the main gate. Benkei hears the strains of Yoshitsune's flute. "Ah, there you are. I recognize that music," says Benkei. "The gentleman from Gojo Bridge. Now, will you give me your sword or won't you?" "Well, you may ask as much as you like, but I'm not going to hand it over. If you still want it, you'll have to come after it." With a roar, Benkei charges up the hill and strikes with his long sword, but Yoshitsune parries the blow. As they exchange blows, spectators begin to gather around them and start placing bets on the outcome. There is so much excitement in the crowd that some of the spectators fall off the temple veranda. After several minutes, though, Benkei's blows begin to weaken. "It looks like the monk is done for," says a voice in the crowd. "He looks tired already." Despite his exhaustion, Benkei struggles on until Yoshitsune seizes his chance. He thrusts the point of his weapon into Benkei's left arm and strikes him with the back of the sword. Benkei drops his weapon and falls to the ground. Yoshitsune places his foot on Benkei's mighty chest. "What do you say, monk? Do you yield?" Benkei glares at him, then breaks into gales of laughter. "Yes, I yield. I've never met a fighter like you. Who are you?" "I am the son of Minamoto no Yoshitomo of the Genji," Yoshitsune declares. "Well, son of Yoshitomo, I am Musashibo Benkei, and I pledge my services to you as a retainer. I will follow you as faithfully as a shadow." Yoshitsune helps Benkei to his feet and tends to his wound. And from that moment on, Benkei becomes Yoshitsune's most loyal companion and will stand by him through all the battles that are yet to come. At the entrance to Kyoto's Kiyomizu Temple today, you can find an abnormally large spear, together with a pair of giant metal clogs and a huge metal staff, all of which are said to have once belonged to the famous monk Benkei. It is said that if you can lift the staff, it will bring you good luck. Kiyomizu, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that has a stunning view overlooking the city, is also the temple that Yoshitsune's mother, Tokiwa, is said to have visited on her flight from the capital, and it was here that she prayed for good fortune and the safety of her children. She surely cannot have predicted then that her young son would grow up to become a legend. But Yoshitsune's fate may have been very different if it were not for a chance meeting with a merchant named Kichiji, who comes to visit one day the temple at Kurama. Yoshitsune, who is by now 16, is itching to leave his monastic life and sees the merchant's visit as a way out. Kichiji, it turns out, is a gold merchant who travels every year between the capital and a city far to the north called Hiraizumi, also known as the City of Gold. Kichiji offers to take Yoshitsune with him, and so the following morning, Yoshitsune, carrying just his pack and bamboo flute, bids farewell to his mother and departs for the north. It will be the start of a long journey that will take him the length of Japan, and, eventually, a meeting with his brother, Yoritomo. The two brothers will eventually bring together the remnants of the Genji, and then face the might of the Heike army. In the next episode, we rejoin Yoritomo as he begins his exile in Izu and learns of a plot to bring down the Heike lord Kiyomori.